Hi there, this is Miss Caitlin from Fibo Kids Art Academy and welcome back to another fall daily draw. Today we're going to be making a barrel of apples. So for today's daily draw, I am going to be using some watercolor. You might want to do this on a kind of thick piece of paper or a watercolor paper if you want to do the same. Now for our daily draw, we're just going to go ahead and start off with our paper and of course writing the number at the top. It's day 24 here. So I'm going to go ahead and head to the top and let's draw a little box with the number 24 inside. Now I'm using a Sharpie to draw today, but I want you to use a pencil. I'm just using the Sharpie so that you can see my lines. That's all. But I definitely want you to use a pencil so that way you can adjust and erase things as you need. Now, as always, you can make this number as fancy or as simple as you like. You can just, write it in plain text or you can write it in cursive. All right, so for our barrel, we need to draw the barrel first and then we'll draw the apples inside. Now, barrels, they are cylindrical, so they're a cylinder of sorts. Sometimes the sides might be more diagonal, sometimes they'll be straight up, it really just depends. Now for our barrel today, the sides of it are going to be slightly slanted. It's almost kind of getting bigger towards the top, but we need to draw the bottom first. So this is going to be a curved line, almost like a U, but obviously not as close together. So check out how I'm going to draw this. Pretty low on the paper. You can see it's curved, but it's not so curved like it would be a U shape. So go ahead and give that a try. Then we are going to go ahead and draw the sides. So I'm going to draw a slight diagonal line up on either side. Now with cylinders, the shapes, we need to do the same curved line on the top as we did on the bottom. Obviously this one's going to be bigger because of the shape of our barrel. So go ahead and take your pencil and draw another curved line to kind of close that shape off. All right, so for our barrel, we can go ahead and put some handles on the side. I'm just going to draw 2 slanted lines out and connect. Keeping it simple today. And then sometimes barrels, they have these bands that are around them, kind of to hold them together. Usually barrels, or at least this barrel happens to be made out of wood. So let's go ahead and take our pencil. We're going to draw 2 curved lines towards the top here. Again, we want these to be really similar to the curved line we've made on the top and bottom of the barrel. That can be pretty tricky to do, so just take your time. You can pause the video if you need. So this is kind of what we're going for. We're going to do the same thing kind of towards the bottom. So go ahead and draw 2 more curved lines. All right, now we're going to go ahead and draw the apples inside. Now for our apples today, just again to keep it simple, we're going to draw them as if they are circles. Now there's going to be a lot of overlapping that's happening because again, they're all kind of piled in on top of each other. So if you can't draw a whole circle for your apple, totally fine. I like to start on the left side. I'm left-handed, so it makes sense. I'm going to draw an apple right here, pretty big. So you can see it's like a circle. And then I'm just going to keep adding in apples. Now as I kind of reach, an edge here, I'm not worried about trying to draw over that. If I was thinking about my apple inside the barrel, how it's resting, I would probably have a little bit there and it would come back up and connect. So this is how I want you to think about your apples today when you go to draw them. You can see there are little spaces in between. That's fine. We don't want to have those spaces all filled in because that wouldn't look natural. So again, we're kind of thinking of overlapping today. All right, I'm going to draw, I think, an apple here. So I'm going to draw an apple that's resting on the top. You'll probably see a little bit of the bottom there. Another apple over here. And here. So you can add as many or as few apples as you like. I'm drawing quite a few apples in this barrel for myself. Sometimes you just have to draw big curved lines. If you want, you can even have an apple that maybe fell out and you can draw it outside of the barrel. Now for our apples, what I want you to do is take your pencil, draw a curved line. That'll kind of show where the stem would be coming out of. And you can draw a little line for the stem. So curved line, stem, curved line, stem. Now all of these curved lines for where the stem is going, they don't need to go the same direction. Some of them can be kind of towards the top, facing the left, facing the right. Some of them can be pointing down. So it's really up to you. And then we can go ahead and start kind of outlining things with a Sharpie. Now, I'm already using a Sharpie and my picture's already outlined, so I don't really need to do anything, but you can pause the video and you can outline as you so desire. But what I want us to do is I do want us to kind of think a little bit about how to fill in these little spaces here. Now, you could do this one of two ways. You could either fill them in with Sharpie, or you could fill them in with a very dark colored marker that is similar to what you want to make your apples. If you look at my drawing, I actually filled in all those little spaces with the Sharpie. So it kind of looks like they're all piled in on top of each other. It adds a little bit to like the line width and how it looks, just a little more interesting. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my Sharpie and fill in all those little spaces. So again, you can do this with your Sharpie, or you could just do this with another marker that's just darker. I do recommend a permanent marker of some kind, just because again, I am gonna be using watercolor. And if you are too, we don't really want this part to, blend away. All right, now I think I've got like a little bit of space here. I could add another apple if I wanted to, but I guess I'm kind of having a little bit of an asymmetrical pile of apples here in the barrel, so that's fine. I'm gonna stick with it. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and take out my markers. Now I have these Crayola markers here today that are really water soluble, which I kind of want. So for my apples, I'm gonna do red and green apples today. For my green apples, I kind of like this color here, this green. It's not like a super bright lime green, it's more of like an olive. What do we call it here? This is actually called iguana green. Oh. So you can use any kind of green you like, any red that you desire. You could even do yellow apples because those exist. But what I'm gonna do is I am gonna take the color that I want, and I'm not gonna fill in the whole apple. I'm actually just gonna find where I want the shadow of the apple to be, which of course means we need to know where our light source is. So the light source in my picture here, I'm gonna say is like maybe coming from above. So like the sunlight, if they're outside, is shining down onto the apples, which means all of my shadows are going to be on the bottoms of the apples. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my marker and add in some shadows. I'm gonna do my red apples first. So again, just kind of doing some strokes. Do try and stay neat with your marker. It will be very important for later. You always want to try and stay as neat as you can, even with such an easy material. And let's see, I think I'll do this one here, red. And I'll do the apple on the ground red, because that way it'll stand out from the green grass. Now the colors that I'm using today are complementary colors. That means that these colors are on opposite sides of the color wheel. So when we put them next to each other, they stand out really, really brightly. They're very vibrant when you put them next to each other. Now I'm also gonna add just a teeny bit of shading on the inside there where the stem is kind of coming out of. Almost like putting in a little oval. All right, and the rest of these are going to be green apples. So I'm gonna take my green, I'm gonna do the same thing. You can also see these colors are Christmas colors. So Christmas colors and the colors we're using for our apples today, they are complementary. They're opposite sides of the color wheel. Now other sets of complementary colors, there are many. You can look at really any color on the color wheel, look across the way and see what its complementary color would be. But the ones that we usually use as examples are, of course, red and green. We also have blue and orange, which are Fibo colors. Those are complementary. And yellow and purple are complementary colors, which are Linker's colors. All right, so I've got that all filled in. I'm gonna also just make sure I've got a little shadow where the stems are. There we have it. Now that looks good, that looks great, they're all shaded, but I want these to be a little bit more interesting. Now you could choose to do this after the watercolor step. I'm gonna do it before just so that you can kind of see it. We can waste no time because you would have to wait for the watercolor to dry in order to do it after the watercolor portion. Take your marker and you can do some hatch lines to kind of make this look a little bit more cartoonish, or you can make it look just more interesting. So you take your marker And I like to have the hatch lines kind of go, you can have them go one of two ways. You can have them go in the same direction as the shadow, kind of like that. I know they're very small. You could alternatively have them go the opposite direction of your shadow. So that you can see they're kind of coming up that way. Both kind of lend themselves to an interesting effect, but you can decide which ones that you want to do. So they're teeny tiny little hatch lines that kind of give us this look as if the color is going to eventually fade away, but instead of it being a smooth transition, a gradient, kind of establishes that with lines instead. So on my original example, I did the hatch lines kind of going in this direction. But again, you could have them going the same direction as the shadow. Again, it's really up to you today. Whatever you think is going to be more interesting. Now, I highly recommend trying to have it complement the roundness of the apples. So see if you can do some curved hatch lines, whichever direction it is that you want it to go. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and set my markers off to the side. That's all we really needed them for. And I'm gonna go ahead and take out my watercolors. Now for my watercolors, I'm gonna go ahead and fill in the apples first, just because they're my favorite part right now, so I wanna do them immediately. I'm gonna be using this medium brush. You could use a small brush if you want to, if you're really worried, if this brush is too big. And I'm gonna start with the red apples. So I'm gonna take some red, not too much though, and I'm just gonna fill in the red apples. Now what's gonna happen is you'll notice that the marker that we used, if you used Crayola markers like I did just now, they're gonna start to kind of blend in to the red watercolor that you put down. Totally fine. Actually looks really cool. It kind of lends itself to the shading a little bit. But if you're like, hey, I actually really liked those hatch lines and I wish I could see more of them, you can wait for your picture to dry, go back in with the marker and just add those hatch lines back in. Now, if you really want these red apples to pop, you can add a little bit of maybe like a yellow orange. And that's gonna make it, again, kind of go to more of a red-orange tinge for the apples, but I find that they just are very vibrant and really pretty, especially with the red shadow that we've already added onto the sides. So I'm gonna add a little bit of that yellow-orange. If you don't have yellow-orange, that's okay. Maybe you can just use a little bit of regular orange. For me, that's this color here. I would probably use less of it though. Alternatively, you could use yellow because red and yellow make orange. So you could just go in with yellow on top. I would just be careful with how vibrant your yellow paint happens to be. All right, so there are my red apples all taken care of. Let's go ahead and do the green. Now for the green, I'm actually gonna go in with yellow. So now we're kind of thinking about analogous colors, colors that are next to each other on the color wheel in order to shade them in nicely. Now, shading with analogous colors can help your objects look very vibrant. So when you look at the object, it's almost expected, like, ah, yes, of course yellow would look really good with that green. Analogous colors, in contrast to complementary, they're easier on the eyes. Now, granted, our complementary colors are kind of the star of the show today, so we're really only using analogous colors when we're trying to fill in each little space, but it's super important to understand your color theory as you're working along. All right, so there are my green apples all filled in. Again, if you're like, hey, I think I want more of those hatch lines, mine are still there. It might be kind of hard for you to see though. Wait for your painting to dry and then you can fill them back in. Now let's go ahead and fill in this barrel. We're gonna start with our lighter color first. I'm gonna use yellow. Make sure your brush is, you don't want too much water on your brush for this part. So just be mindful, if you have too much water on your brush, just go ahead and wipe off some of that extra water inside your water cup or your bucket. Now remember those little bands that I was talking about? I want to fill those in with a darker color later. So I'm going to fill in all the parts of the barrel that are just the wood part. All right. And then I'm going to fill in the wood part with brown. Now, brown can be a pretty intense color, so I'm going to go ahead and switch to a smaller brush just so I can be more accurate. Get it nice and wet. Pick up some brown. I don't want too much though. I already know my brown paint is pretty strong, so I'm going to be quite careful when I go to put this down. Now, if you accidentally get brown paint into the yellow and it's kind of like bleeding into one another, that's okay. Maybe just take a paper towel and just gently tap that off. Don't rub, just tap it. Wait for that area to dry, and then you can go ahead and fix things up later. All right, so you can see with that brown, it is pretty dark. You can make it darker if you want by using less water and more paint, but just be mindful to make sure that your watercolor, you're still able to spread it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and do this area down here. Looks like my brush is kind of dry, so I'm going to go ahead and just get more water and to fill all of that in. Now we are going to add some shading onto the barrel here with our watercolor. It's going to be pretty loose because again, this is just supposed to be a fast little daily draw. Nothing too serious. Oh, and you can fill in the handles, by the way, with your color. I'm going to take the very point of my small brush and I'm just going to fill that in very carefully. Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, use my small brush while my yellow paint is still wet, take a teeny tiny bit of brown, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in short vertical strokes to kind of show the individual pieces of wood or even just the texture of what this barrel is probably made out of. All inside these yellow spaces first. Now I'm using the brush standing straight up so that I can use that tip. You can see it makes a very thin stroke. That's what we kind of want. From here, I can take my brush, get it nice and clean, pick up a teeny tiny bit of brown, again using the very top of the brush. I'm doing a small stroke across the top and a small stroke across the bottom. Just to kind of help blend that a little bit. Do the same thing on the bottom. Now it's okay if some of your stripes here kind of blend away into the yellow paint. You can see some of mine have already started to do that. Totally fine for this project. Again, we just want it to be kind of loose. Oh, that was a little too much brown. I'm going to wipe off my brush of that. With a clean brush, I'm going to spread that out first before I take any more. I'll definitely be sure to add a little bit more brown to the very bottom of the barrel because that's where most of the shadow would be anyway if my light source is going to be at the top of my piece. You can also feel free to add a stripe onto the sides of the barrel to just help it look a little bit more round. All right, and there we have it. Now let's go ahead and just add a little bit of a ground line here. I'm going to use a green to kind of just add some grass. So I'm switching back to my medium brush. I'm going to take it kind of underneath my barrel here. You can see I'm almost using the side of the brush to make these horizontal strokes for the ground. This way we can clearly see, this is the ground line. It's very different from all the vertical lines that we have here on our barrel. Now the farther away you get from your object in the foreground, especially when we're making kind of these textured lines for the ground, the smaller those texture lines are going to be. The closer you are to the viewer, that's you, the artist, the bigger the lines will be. Things in the foreground appear bigger and lower, while things in the background are smaller and higher. Now, if you want to add in a little bit more color, maybe this is like, this green is great, looks good, but you know, I think I want it to be a little bit more vibrant to sort of match the apples that I have. I think that's a great thought process to have. So let's go ahead and pick up some yellow paint and add that in on top of the green. And that is gonna make it look very vibrant. It's also gonna kind of create yellow-green in some areas. If you want, you can even do maybe some very short vertical strokes to show like maybe there's tall grass hanging out somewhere in the background. And you can even bring that underneath maybe a little apple that's fallen out from the barrel there. All right. Now, if that shadow for the green is still not dark enough for you, you can take a little bit of dark blue and just add in maybe a couple strokes underneath. Again, thinking about our color theory, analogous colors in this case, blue is typically darker than green. So we can use that to add darker colors or more shading. All right. So that concludes the daily draw. If you've made any sort of mess with your watercolors, make sure that you clean your space afterwards. But you can share your artwork with us on the Fibo Village Facebook page. I think everybody would love to see what you've created today. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you again very soon. Bye for now.